The rain had laid a skin of ice on the north fence by the time Elias Vane heard the knock. He was banking the fire, a man in his 40s with the weathered, patient look of something that has been bent and straightened and bent again. And he had been alone so long that the sound of a human hand on his door made him go still the way a deer goes still. The line camp sat at the far edge of the Wren Fork country, a sod and timber shack with a lean-to for his mule and a grave on the hill behind it that he tended with a care he gave nothing else. He opened the door, and there she stood, soaked through, her hand white-knuckled on the handle of a carpet-bag, and the shape of her condition unmistakable in the lamplight. "Ma'am," he said. It was all he could think to say. "I'm sorry to trouble you," she said, and her voice was shaking but her chin was not. "I was told there was a light out here. I've walked from town. I don't have anywhere to go tonight, and I'm afraid to be alone in the dark." He stood in the doorway for a long moment, and the wind pushed at them both. He could have closed the door. That was the honest truth of it. He could have closed the door, and it would have been the reasonable thing, the safe thing, the thing every voice in his head was telling him to do. A man alone, a woman in her condition, a town that would talk. But he had spent 20 years mending fences, and he knew the difference between a wire that had snapped and a wire that had simply never been given a chance to hold. "Come in out of the weather," he said, and stepped aside. She came in like a thing that had forgotten how to be indoors, careful, apologetic, taking up as little space as she could. He hung her coat by the fire and poured her coffee, and he did not ask the questions he wanted to ask, because he had learned that a person will tell you what they need you to know when they are ready. She told him her name was Ada Mercer, and he recognized the name the way you recognize a scar, the circle bar, the old man's pride, the girl who had been turned out. "You're the fence mender," she said, looking at the coils of wire and the post maul by the door. "They call me a lot of things," he said. "That one's true. You can have the bed," he said. "I'll take the floor by the fire. In the morning we'll figure out what comes next." She looked at him then, and there was something in her face he had not expected. Not fear, not gratitude, but a kind of exhausted, disbelieving wonder, as if she had been bracing for a blow and had received, instead, a hand held out. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "You don't know me. I could be anything." He thought about it, really thought about it, the way a man thinks about a fence that has to hold through the winter. He thought about the grave on the hill, and the years he had spent learning that a man cannot mend what he was not there to protect. And he said, quiet, the way a man says a thing he has been carrying a long time. "I've been broke before. Being broke ain't the same as being done." She did not answer. She did not have to. The fire settled, and the rain went on against the roof. And for the first time in 9 years, Elias Vane had somebody else's breathing in the room with him, and it did not feel like a wound. It felt, strangely, like the first stitch in a long mending. The next morning the world found them. By noon the whole of Morrow's Ford knew that the Mercer girl had spent the night at the line camp with the widower. Wilcox the storekeeper came out himself, a flour sack over his shoulder and a worried look on his honest face. "Elias," he said, "lo, you know what they're saying. A man in your place, taking in a girl in her condition, they'll read it the worst way." "Let them read it however they like," Elias said. "They're welcome to the book." "She's got a father with a long arm," Wilcox said. "You know he'll hear of this before sundown." "I expect he will," Elias said. "I expect he'll hear it from me." Ada, for her part, did not hide. She walked into town the next day with her head up, and when Dolly Fenn made a show of turning her back, Ada asked Wilcox in a clear voice that carried, whether he had any calico in a soft blue, because she meant to take in sewing. Wilcox, to his credit, sold it to her, and word of that traveled too. But the long arm her father had promised was already reaching. On the third night, a rider came up the line, Burl, the circle bar's foreman, a slab of a man on a big bay horse. He did not dismount. He sat in the yard with the rain dripping off his hat and delivered his message like a man reading a notice off a board. "Mr. Mercer says to tell you," Burl said, "that he holds the note on this place. He says to tell you that a man who shelters what he threw out is a man who's made his choice, and that choices have prices. He says the note comes due the 1st of the month, and he'll take the camp and the grazing rights with it." Elias stood in the doorway with the lamp behind him. The note. He had forgotten, or had let himself forget, that the line camp had been bought on credit 9 years ago, in the hard year after Letty died, and that the paper had passed into Orrin Mercer's hands when the bank failed. He had been paying it down slow, the way he mended fences. And now the whole thing was due, and he had maybe a month, and the man holding the paper was the man whose daughter was asleep in his bed. "Tell Mr. Mercer," Elias said, "that I'll have his money." Earl's mouth twitched. "He said you'd say that. He said to tell you that a man who's broke don't get to set his own terms." The foreman turned his horse and rode off into the dark, and Elias stood in the doorway a long time after the sound of hooves had gone. Behind him, he heard Ada's voice, small and careful. "Elias, what does he hold?" He turned and looked at her, standing in the lamplight with her hand on her middle, and he thought about the note, and the grave on the hill, and the years of patient mending, and he said, "Everything I built. And I aim to keep it. And I wonder sometimes, and I'd like to know what you think. When a door closes behind you and the only way forward is through a stranger's kindness, what is it in a person that decides whether they trust it or run from it?" Because Ada trusted. And Elias, who had not trusted anything in 9 years, trusted her back. And the whole country was watching to see which one of them was wrong. The month that followed was the strangest of Elias Vane's life, and the fullest. Ada took in the town's mending shirts, trousers, a wedding dress that had to be let out in a hurry, and she sewed at the table by the window, the needle moving the way her mother's had, sure and unhurried. The money, though, was the problem that would not be mended. The note came due at the end of the month, and Orrin Mercer had set the price high, higher than the camp was worth, higher than a fence mender's savings could reach. Elias counted what he had twice, and both times the sum came up short. He did not tell Ada. It was Ada who found him out. She asked him one evening, "How short are you?" He considered lying. He had never been any good at it. $200, he said. Maybe more by the time he adds his interest. She did not flinch. The cattle buyers come through at the end of the month, the day before the note's due. They pay cash for a herd driven to the railhead at Cimarron Crossing. If we could gather the strays off the open range, the unbranded ones, the ones nobody's claimed, we could drive them down and sell them, and the money would be ours. It's honest. It's legal. And it's the only thing I can see that would get us there. Elias stared at her. The unbranded strays. Wild, half-grown cattle that drifted off the big herds, belonging to no man until a man was bold enough to claim them. It was the oldest gamble in the cattle country. "That's a hard ride," he said. "For a man alone. And you," he stopped. "I can ride," she said. "I was raised on the circle bar. I can ride better than half the men who work for my father, and I can work a rope. And I'm not asking you to let me come because I'm fragile, Elias. I'm asking you to let me come because I'm useful." He looked at her, and he understood something he had not understood before. That she was not asking him to save her. She was asking him to let her stand beside him while they saved themselves. 2 days, he said. "We gather at first light, we drive through the night, we sell at Cimarron before the note comes due. If the weather holds and the river's low." "If the weather holds," she repeated, and she smiled, and it was the first real smile he had seen on her. "Then we'd best hope the weather holds." The gathering was the hardest work either of them had ever done. They rode out before dawn and worked the draws and the coulees where the strays hid. The cattle were wild and quick and mean, and by noon Elias's hands were raw, and Ada, who had not complained once, was the one who found the trick of it. She showed him, quiet, how to read the cattle's drift, how to work the edges and let the herd come together on its own instead of chasing it into a scatter. By evening they had a herd small, but real, 37 head of unbranded stock, milling in the gather pen at the foot of the hill. He did the arithmetic in his head, and he thought, it might be enough. They ate cold beans by the fire that night, and Ada said, "My mother used to say that the needle holds what it's asked to hold. I never understood it when I was little. I thought she meant the thread. But she meant the person holding it. You hold the work steady, and the work holds you." Elias did not answer. He was looking at the grave on the hill, dark against the stars, thinking about a different kind of holding, the kind a man does when he lets go of the thing he cannot keep so that he can keep the thing he can. That night, for the first time in 9 years, the weight was lighter. They started the drive before dawn, and the herd moved out across the open country like a slow brown river, and the day was good, clear and cold, the kind of day that makes a man believe the world might be on his side. And then the weather did not hold. The storm came up out of the west without warning. A wall of black cloud and a wind that went from nothing to screaming, and the rain came down in sheets, and the cattle, spooked and wild, broke. They scattered like shot, and by the time the storm passed the herd was gone, scattered across 10 miles of broken country, and the river between them and Cimarron Crossing had come up out of its banks and was running fast and brown and impossible. He found Ada at the edge of the wash, her mare lathered and blowing, her face white in the gray light. She was holding the rope that had held the lead steer, and the rope was empty, and she said, "Quiet, I lost them. I lost them all." "No," he said. "We lost them, and we're not done yet." He rode the draws all that night and into the next morning, and by noon he had found maybe a dozen of the 37, and the river was still up, and the note came due at sundown, and he stood at the edge of the water with the rain starting again and the whole weight of it coming down on him, and he understood, finally, what it meant to be broke in the country's own terms. Not out of money, but out of time and out of luck, and out of everything a man builds his life on except the one thing. He has left, and that was when the rider came. He came up out of the gray, a big man on a bay horse, and Elias knew him before he could see his face. Burl, the Circle Bar's foreman. He reined up at the edge of the wash and looked at the scattered cattle and the high brown river, and he said, "Mr. Mercer sent me. He says to tell you he's heard about your drive. He says he'll take the camp and the note and the grazing rights, and he'll take them today, and that you can keep the girl. He says a man who gambles on the weather and loses don't get to set his own terms." Elias stood in the rain, and the river ran past him, and he thought about the note and the camp and the grave on the hill, and the woman waiting back at the edge of the wash with her hand on her middle, and he said, "Tell Mr. Mercer that I'll have his money. Tell him the sun comes up tomorrow, and I'll have his money." Burl looked at him for a long moment, and something moved behind the foreman's eyes. Not pity, not contempt, but something like the respect a working man gives another working man who is down and still standing. He nodded, slow, and turned his horse, and rode off into the gray. And Elias stood at the edge of the river with the rain coming down and the note coming due and the whole country against him, and he did not know, yet, how he would keep his word. He only knew that he had given it. He found her at the gather pen, sitting on the wet rail with her coat pulled around her and the empty rope in her hands. When she spoke, her voice was flat and tired, the voice of a person who has stopped hoping and is only waiting. "I heard him," she said. "He's right, isn't he? We gambled on the weather and we lost. That's the whole of it." Elias stood in the mud and looked at her, and he thought about the years of mending, and the grave on the hill, and he said, "The river's up, but rivers go down, and the note's due at sundown, but the sun comes up tomorrow." She looked at him then, and there was something in her face he had not seen before. A crack, the first real break in the armor she had worn since the night she knocked on his door. "And what happens tomorrow," she said, "when he takes the camp? Where do we go? Where do I go?" He came and sat on the rail beside her, not touching her, just there, the way a man sits beside a fence that is leaning and means to hold it up with his presence. And he said, "Quiet, I've been broke before, Ada. I've lost everything a man can lose and kept walking. And I'm still here. That's the only thing I know how to promise you, that I'll still be here." She was quiet for a long time. The rain had stopped, and the sky was going gray to silver at the edge, and yet something in the air had changed, the way the air changes before a thing settles. "You lost somebody," she said. It was not a question. He nodded. "My wife, Letty. 9 years ago this spring. She took sick in the hard winter, and I was out on the line, and by the time I got back, he stopped and the old weight came up in him and he let it. I buried her on the hill. I've kept the weeds off her grave every week since. I thought for a long time that if I could just keep doing that, mending the fences, keeping the camp standing, keeping her grave clean, I'd be keeping my word to her. And now," she said. He looked at the hill, at the grave, and he said, "Now I think maybe she'd want me to hold something else. Something that's still alive." She did not answer, but she reached out, slow, and laid her hand on his arm. The first time she had touched him, and she said, "Quiet," the words coming out like something she had been carrying a long time. "I've been holding my mother's needle my whole life, Elias. Holding it steady, waiting for somebody to see what it could do. And you're the first person who ever looked at me and saw the work instead of the shame." He looked at her, and the river ran past them, and the sun broke through the clouds at the edge of the world. And he said, "Then let's finish the work." And I want to pause here just for a moment because I know what it feels like to hold steady so long that you forget you're allowed to put the weight down. If this story has meant something to you tonight, leave a like and a subscribe, and let's keep this little corner of the world warm together. They did not sleep that night. They worked. Ada took the mare and rode the draws by moonlight, and she found the cattle. Not all of them, but more than he had dared to hope. 23 head gathered in a brushy coulee where the storm had pushed them. Elias did the only thing he knew how to do when the world came apart. He mended. And in the gray hour before dawn, Ada came in with the herd. "The river's still up," she said, "but I know a crossing higher up where the old trail fords it. It's shallow there even in flood. It's the long way around and we'll be late, but we can make Cimarron before the buyers pull out." He looked at the herd, and the light coming up, and the river, and he said, "Then let's go." The drive that day was the longest of Elias Vane's life. They pushed the cattle hard through the morning, and the herd, tired and trail-broke now, moved the way a herd moves when it decides to cooperate. Ada rode point and Elias rode the drag. They reached the ford at midday, and the crossing was there. A wide, shallow place where the river spread thin over gravel, and the cattle went across in a long brown line with the water up to their bellies, and then they were across, and the railhead at Cimarron Crossing showed on the horizon. A smudge of smoke and a scatter of buildings, and he let himself believe, for the first time in 2 days, that they might actually make it. They came in at the edge of evening, and the buyers were still there. A lean man in a canvas coat with a tally book, and he looked at the cattle with a practiced eye, and he said, "Unbranded stock, gathered off the open range." "You got papers?" "We got the country's word," Elias said. "They're ours by the oldest law there is. We gathered them, we held them, we drove them." The buyer looked at him for a long moment, and then he looked at Ada, sitting the mare at the edge of the pen with her hand on her middle and her chin up, and something in the man's face softened. "I ain't never seen a woman bring in a herd in her condition, with the river up. That's worth something even in this country." He wrote a figure in his book, and he showed it to Elias, and the figure was enough. It was more than enough. It was the note and the interest and a little left over, and Elias stood in the dust of the railhead with the evening coming down, and he felt something give way in his chest. The thing he had been holding steady for 9 years, and it was the lightest he had felt since before Letty died. Ada came up beside him, and she looked at the figure in the book, and she did not say anything. She just stood there, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her, and after a moment she said, "Quiet, we did it." "We did it," he said. And they stood there in the dust and the evening, 2 broken people who had mended each other, and the herd lowed behind them, and the town's lamps came on one by one, and it was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of the thing they had both been too afraid to name. They came home to the Wren Fork country on a clear morning, the herd sold, the money in a canvas sack under the wagon seat. Ada sat beside Elias with her hand resting on her middle, and for the first time in her life she was coming home to a place that had chosen her. The news had traveled ahead of them, and by the time they reached the North Line there was a crowd at the camp. The whole of Morrow's Ford turned out to see the girl who had been thrown out and the herd she had brought in with the river up. Wilcox the storekeeper was there, and old Moss, and Brother Ansel with his worried collar, and Dolly Fenn, who had come to see whether the story was true. Elias pulled the wagon up at the foot of the hill and helped Ada down, and they stood together in the yard while the crowd waited, quiet, to see a thing settled. It was Ada who spoke first. "Mr. Wilcox," she said, her voice carrying clear and steady, "I've got your shirts done, and the wedding dress is finished, and I'll bring them into town tomorrow. And since you've all come to see it, I've got something to say." She looked at the crowd, at the faces she had known her whole life, and she said, "My father threw me out because he said I'd shamed the Mercer name. He was wrong about what I am and wrong about what shame is. I'm not ashamed of my baby, or the work I've done, or the man who opened his door to me when every other door was closed. If that's a scandal, I'll wear it proud." There was a long silence. Then, from the back of the crowd, old Moss let out a low chuckle. "Well, I'll be damned." The girls got more spine than the whole town put together. And the tension broke, and there was laughter, and someone clapped, and Dolly Fenn's face went through a whole argument before she looked away. And that was when the rider came up the line. A big man on a bay horse, and the crowd parted for him the way it parts for a man who owns the ground. And Orrin Mercer reined up in the yard and looked at his daughter, at Elias, at the camp, and the whole country held its breath. He sat his horse for a long moment, and then he did something nobody in the crowd had ever seen Orrin Mercer do. He took off his hat. "Ada," he said, his voice rough, "I come to see for myself. I heard you brought in a herd off the open range with the river up, that you paid the note. I heard you did it yourself, rode point, worked the rope, brought it in." He stopped, swallowed, looked at the ground, then back at her. "I did," she said. "I was raised on the circle bar, Pa. You taught me to ride, even if you never once told me you were proud of me." The old man's jaw worked, and Orrin Mercer said, quiet, the words coming out like they were pulled from him one at a time, "I was wrong. I was wrong to throw you out, and I was wrong about what you are, and I've known it every day since. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to let me make it right." Ada looked at him, and she thought about the night she had walked out of the gate in the rain, and she said, "I'll let you try, Pa. That's all I can promise." She reached out and took Elias's hand. "This is my home now. This man opened his door to me when you closed yours. Whatever you want to make right, you'll make it right with both of us, or you won't make it right at all." Orrin Mercer looked at Elias, and Elias looked back at him, and for a long moment the two men measured each other, the rancher who had held the note and the fence mender who had paid it. Then Orrin Mercer nodded, slow. "Then I'll make it right with both of you." He turned his horse and rode off down the line, and the crowd drifted away, and Ada stood in the yard with Elias's hand in hers and watched her father's dust hang in the air until it was gone. The wedding was in the fall in the little church in Morrow's Ford, with the whole town out, the same town that had closed its doors on her, now filling the pews. Ada wore the blue dress she had sewn for the harvest dance the year she turned 19, and she looked at Elias across the aisle and remembered the night she had knocked on his door in the rain. The baby came in the early spring, a boy, and they named him Elias, after his father, and the old Elias held him in the lamplight with a wonder on his face that Ada carried with her the rest of her life. The note was paid, and the camp was theirs, and the mending spread the way mending spreads when a thing is done right. Orrin Mercer, in the years after, was a changed man. Not overnight, but the way a fence changes, a section at a time. He came to the camp for Sunday dinners and taught his grandson to ride. He told the story, more than once, of the daughter who had brought in a herd with the river up, and he told it with a pride Ada had never heard in her childhood, and she let him tell it because she understood that a man can be wrong and still be trying to be right. The camp grew. Elias built on a porch, and the porch became where the country came to sit, the riders and the widows and the lost ones, the thrown out and the ones with nowhere to go, and they found coffee and a fire and a man who knew how to mend and a woman who held a needle steady, and the word spread that there was a door in the Wren Fork country that did not close. On the hill behind the camp, the grave stayed clean, and Elias went up every week, the way he had for 9 years, and he stood there with the wind moving the grass and the country spread out below, and he said, quiet, the words he had carried since the night a soaked girl knocked on his door. "I found something worth holding, Letty. I hope that's all right." And the wind moved the grass, and the sun came up over the ridge, and down in the yard Ada was calling him for supper, and the baby was laughing in the lamplight, and the fence mender of the Wren Fork country turned and walked down the hill toward the sound of his own name. And if you're still here with me, thank you for sitting with these two broken people while they mended. If this story found a place in you tonight, I'd be honored if you'd leave a like and a subscribe and tell me in the comments what you'd carry from it. And next time, I want to tell you about a woman who kept a lighthouse on a coast where the ships didn't come anymore. A woman the whole county had written off, until the night the sea decided to test her. I'll see you there. Take care of yourselves and each other.